welcome to Miles Groth, Tamas Fazekas, and Kile, the three authors of the third in the series of SCA dialogues. Now, this is the book. It has been published very recently and it's on sale on Amazon. There will be more coming soon, but I'm not going to spoil the surprise for you. The SCA wishes to thank the authors for being part of this project, and the proceeds of the sales of this book have been donated to the SCA. Funds are used by the SCA to finance scholarships for students in financial need and to help with various projects, to build a community for therapists, for teachers, writers, and whoever is interested in existential thought, or indeed also from other schools or modalities. Another project, hopefully, will be to organize and offer in the future affordable existential training and to allow the less privileged to become wonderful therapists. Finally, I wish to invite those present to also join the SCA Dialogues project. Perhaps you're already in a dialogue or a correspondence with a colleague, and why not share it and have it published by the SCA? If you want to accept my invitation, please get in touch and I will guide you in the necessary steps.
Thank you, Paola. This is the third opportunity that I've had to participate in an SCA event, and this is an especially important one because it really focuses on what has been at the center of my interest for quite a number of years, but in this past very, very strange 18 months, a lot came into focus. I'm just at this point going to serve to introduce the editor of the book, and following his comments, my colleague, Dr. Fazekas, will have something to say of a formal kind, and then I'll have my piece, and then we'll take some questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kile Glover. Basic information about Kile is that he's completing his doctorate in clinical psychology at PsyD, living now in California. Beyond that, I'll let Kile explain himself and talk a little bit about how he became part of this project.
Hello, everyone. Yes, as Miles said, I'm the lowly editor for this project, so I won't take too much time away from our two authors, but they had kindly included me in this to take a look at the work and edit it, and then actually wound up writing an introduction to it as well. I've known Miles since I was 19 years old, which is going on nearly 13, 14 years now. And I was an undergraduate in his psychology courses at Wagner College on Staten Island in New York. And he introduced me to many interesting ideas, and many of those were in one of our first classes together, which was an existential psychology. And really that kind of piqued my interest. I didn't know much about this at the time, but it really started a kind of now a prolonged quest to understand all that entails. He introduced me to Heidegger, to Sartre, Camus. So really, these people are big figures in at first I worked in, after Wagner, I worked in the mental health field, mostly as a kind of case manager for those who were so-called severely mentally ill, and have really seen kind of the system of mental health care within the United States, and seen its dysfunction from the ground up, from the kind of the lowliest position that I was in to now being a therapist at a fairly well-to-do rehab in drug rehab in California. I feel like I've had a chance to see where the real kind of failings of treatment are for many people, and that has only driven home my interest in existential psychology and Daseinsanalysis. So I believe it presents kind of a better way forward, or a more humane way of treating people. And a wise man once said, "Treatment is how you treat people." And I think the essence of Daseinsanalysis for me is just a real human way of being with others. If you read the introduction to the book, if you've had a chance to take a look at it, you would see my introduction. Maybe it seems kind of pessimistic. Maybe that's just a bit of my nature shining forth, but really I have a lot of optimism for Daseinsanalysis. I recently at work, I have group supervision with a number of other kind of doctoral candidates, and they'd kind of tasked me this past week with presenting on something that I'm interested in, so that we can all kind of know where we're coming from. And most of my colleagues have a background in cognitive behavioral therapy or behaviorism. In the United States, we're quite the heritage of behaviorism is the preferred form of treatment. So I didn't know what sort of reception talking about Daseinsanalysis, what sort of reception I would receive. But on the whole, when I started talking about it, and starting from the very basics, I found that the reception was overwhelmingly positive. That even for my colleagues who were more concerned with the behavioral side of things, I found them remarking, say, something akin to, "Oh wait, this is the kind of therapy we wanted to do with people, right? We want to sit down with people and really kind of know what's going on in their hearts." And even maybe for the first time, I heard some of their own kind of criticisms of the limits of a kind of behavioral psychology. And that really stoked a kind of optimism in me to know that maybe there are a lot of therapists out there who are kind of bogged down in a certain way of doing things within a certain system that maybe gets in the way of really meeting people where they're at. But to know that they have that kind of that spark within them that's just waiting maybe for someone to come forward with some new ideas, kind of inspire people to work with people in a really human and real way. That's where my optimism is. And I think as a whole, I'm in presentations like this, at work, and through the book of letters from Miles and Tamas, I think there's a really good chance that there's a renaissance of therapy coming, after having been bogged down for so long within the mental illness care system. But I don't want to keep rambling on, so I'll let the two gentlemen who actually wrote the letters do some speaking. But I appreciate them giving me some time to speak, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for your work and for finding lots of typos and errors and need for clarifications. Your editorial work is much appreciated. Just to those who are there, I'm not sure how long Kile will be able to stay with the meeting, because he told me in advance that he had some obligations to meet with patients there at the clinic where he is. But we hope he'll hang around as long as that's possible. Dr. Tamas Fazekas and I met in Budapest about 13 years ago at a meeting of the International Federation of Daseinsanalysts there. And over the more than a decade that has passed, we've become friends. And when the opportunity came to do a set of letters in this series, we both jumped at the opportunity, perhaps especially to continue our friendship. And I think if you read the letters, which are at times very serious and at times very playful and meant to be that way, you'll get a sense, I think, of a person-to-person event that in its own way reflects the perspective of Dasein's analysis. Dr. Fazekas is a pediatrician. He is also the holder of a doctorate, PhD, and as formally the longest connection with Dasein's analysis, the longer of the two of us who have prepared these letters for you, and we'll be talking about them today. So with that, my dear friend Tamas, I'll ask you to say hi to everybody.
Well, hi to everybody. Dear Miles, thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you, Kile, for your introduction and for your tremendous work supporting us. And of course, once again, thank you so much, Paola, for taking over this project and for supporting us and for making all this possible, this publication and much more. It's in my opinion, it's not only a book, as Miles has put it perfectly right. It's a story, it's a dialogue, like in antique philosophy, in Greek ancient philosophy, we had this form of dialogues that are not just for fun or just for relaxing, but they are meant to be very authentic, because it's a real conversation between two friends that have the same passion, in this case Daseinsanalysis. And this is not a classical scientific publication. So that's why I do appreciate a lot the support of Paola and SEA, because it's not so frequent to publish such a way of literature. And I think it's really the most authentic way of demonstrating what Daseinsanalysis is. So thank you very much again for letting us publish our dialogues. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great honor for me, from Vienna to participate in this session, and it's a great pleasure indeed for me to have the opportunity to present our new book that we wrote with Miles, correspondence in let's say old-fashioned letters. But in fact, I think our project is not old-fashioned at all. This project started, well, this year with this book and the opening of the American Daseinsanalytic Institute in New York City. Miles is the president of this institute, and I think you can be proud of that, to be the president of the first American Daseinsanalytic Institute. We already have candidates showing their interest in the formation and learning about Daseinsanalysis. So this project doesn't only consist of the book and of the institute. It's a renaissance of Daseinsanalysis, but it's even more. In my opinion, this project is part of a renaissance of psychotherapy as such. So let me briefly highlight some topics of our dialogues to give you a glimpse at our aims and at our thoughts, and of course an outlook for the future of this project of the Renaissance of Psychotherapy. To begin with, we tried to analyze the difference between the terms Dasein versus existence. We had to overcome problems related to German language, obviously, because there's still a huge need for more English literature on Daseinsanalysis. We are convinced that the term Dasein deserves more attention in the English-speaking world than it does today, because it conveys a very special and unique way of approaching our world, a unique way of everyday life. The term Dasein cannot be translated in any other language. It has to be used as a technical term, as the word Gestalt. I have been founding the Hungarian Institute of Daseinsanalysis now 15 years ago, and we had very long discussions about the translation of the term Dasein into Hungarian language, which is probably even more more away from German language than the English language. And we were struggling for, well, about a year, and at the end, eventually, we had to say that there is no possibility to translate the word Dasein into Hungarian language, even though there are a lot of words getting close to that, what we mean. And we faced the same problem in English language, and I think that and we tried to convince everyone with our dialogues that it's really not possible to translate Dasein into any other language. In the field of psychotherapy, analysis of Dasein is known as a therapeutic modality since the 1940s. But the term Daseinsanalysis is more than just the name of a modality. It describes a serene and open attitude of the therapist applying hermeneutic phenomenology in order to avoid any other technique, in order to remain dogmatic. We could summarize Daseinsanalysis saying, setting being free here, as Miles Groth has put it. Maybe I would just add a tiny kick by saying, setting being free here in the world, in order to emphasize our understanding of world in contrast to a merely geographic here. The word Dasein consists of two words, Da which could be translated with here, and Sein, which could be translated by being. The term Dasein has often been used synonymously with the term existence, even in German. In everyday life, if you ask someone in the streets of Vienna if they know the term Dasein, they would probably deny it. But if you ask them whether they know what existence means, everyone would know. So in everyday language in German, this is definitely more popular than the word Dasein. But there are significant differences between these two words. We tried in our dialogues to elaborate this difference, showing that they convey pretty diverse approaches to our everyday world. To avoid any confusion with misleading connotations of the term existence, such as the purely economic potential of individuals, this is the way that in German we would use the word existence. My existence is in danger would mean that I don't have enough money to make a living. So this misleading connotation as economic potential of the individuals, Daseinsanalytic literature sometimes uses the term used by Martin Heidegger, existence, written with a K and a hyphen. Our existence is the way our Dasein is in the world. Hence, our existence cannot be constrained. Our being free can be constrained. We have tried to make clear in our book what Dasein means, why it can't be translated and why it can't be replaced by the word existence. Daseinsanalysis is significantly different from the so-called existential therapies. During Daseinsanalysis, we are treating primarily pathologies of Dasein. We are not treating primarily existence. Existence is what becomes visible of our Dasein in everyday life. We are interested in the Dasein, in the existentials, in very personal, authentic possibilities of human beings, of our patient others. If you want, existence is a small part of our Dasein, a mode of our Dasein. Existence can only be involved with other existence on the ontic level, whereas Daseinsanalysis is looking for the ground. I already mentioned that Daseinsanalysis is trying to be adogmatic. The coronavirus pandemic made people tired in the last months all over the world. People are more than ever not looking for dogma, but for freedom. Psychotherapy is needed to tackle the psychological burden of the pandemic. Daseinsanalysis is increasingly applied, at least here in Austria, not least because it is adogmatic. Here we can show the typical difference to other psychotherapies. This difference becomes mostly obvious during dream analysis. Daseinsanalysis had for a long time the reputation of being ineffective due to the lack of techniques, of being elitist due to the difficult terminology, and chaotic due to the lack of a clear-cut structural framework. Indeed, during our daily work as Daseinsanalysts, we must avoid any interpretation or manipulation, for example, of the dream's content, because we can always find a novel possibility of life only if we are not trying to manipulate our patient by our own interpretations and assumptions. We just have to be open towards all phenomena that show themselves as they are. The same so-called existentials, the basic components of our life as humans, as during daytime are either open or limited during dreaming too. Hence, we are open for all the existentials and for all the phenomena showing up, not only for the obvious ones. We don't have a checklist of existentials when we perform Daseinsanalysis. As therapists, we simply notice these existentials in our attitude of serenity, especially if one existential is missing or prevailing or limited. In order to read all the relevant phenomena in dreams, we need to repeat them several times. By telling the dream again and again, the patient will remember more and more details. On the other hand, we are asking for details, predominantly asking for those existentials not being mentioned by the patient other. We are definitely not looking for any hidden symbols. We have no dictionary of typical dreams that can be translated into prophetic sentences. We're not looking for any hidden content, be it erotic or suppressed wishes or drives. This is unique in Daseinsanalysis. We have no interpretation, not even an analysis of dreams. We take dreams as seriously as any other phenomenon in life. Yet, talking about dreams is the main part of Daseinsanalysis. It can take 2 or 3 sessions to discuss a dream that is as short as just one sentence. Taking phenomena seriously, just the way they show themselves, without changing them by any technique, without interpretation. This is what we consider as a dogmatic. Furthermore, I mentioned the term serenity. Serenity is our way to work as psychotherapists. As a therapist, I'm entirely Da during therapy, with my whole Dasein present with all my existentials. I'm not just here, I'm not just in a room sitting opposite a patient. I'm Da with my whole existence, with my authentic being in the world. I'm not nothing. We discussed a lot about this topic with Miles, and I'm very looking forward to continue this discussion with you. I think we mean the same thing. We just express it in different words, and I think this makes our dialogue so beautiful as a correspondence. I think that as a therapist, I'm not nothing. I'm a human being. Yes, this is difficult to be serene, but it can be learned as a kind of art. We show our patients 3 things. First, we show them the importance of openness towards phenomena. Not a maximal openness, but an optimal openness. Not an objective, general optimal, but a personal one. Every single Dasein in the world has a different way of optimal openness, but a personal one. Every single Dasein in the world has a different way. It makes you sick if you are open towards everything, as in schizophrenia. And it also makes you sick if you are not open at all, as in depressive disorders. Second, we show our patients the danger of manipulating phenomena, but sometimes it's tempting in a fast daily life, especially in our Western culture. We have learned some kind of instant interpretation. We have learned to draw immediate conclusions of everything in order to warrant the quickest possible action. Third, we can show our patients how to discover relevant phenomena in dreams. I wouldn't say that the patient after complete Daseinsanalysis is a professional dream analyst, but I do think that our former patients are able to understand the dreams better for the rest of their lives. It's not necessary to understand philosophy in order to understand Daseinsanalysis, but in turn, I'm convinced that every single human being has a strong philosophical disposition. Everyone asks himself philosophical questions at some points in his life, and is therefore open for philosophical insights in some way. Every person is unique, even if you all share the same existentials as human beings. The uniqueness resides of unmistakable mix of possibilities in everyday life. Daseinsanalysis assumes that psychopathology develops if these possibilities are constricted for too long. We therefore need to see, if not to understand, as therapists, all those obstacles that have been hindering our patients' Dasein to unfold and to make use of those very own possibilities. This therapeutic conversation, this relationship, the speech of our patient can change his Dasein in a positive way. The constricted personal possibilities often show themselves in psychosomatic symptoms. If you wish, our whole life is psychosomatics. Hence, psychosomatics is not a disease as such. Psychosomatics is basically healthy life. Furthermore, psychosomatics is a way of being open or concealed. It's a way of relating to other fellow human beings. And this is the meaning of psychosomatic symptoms. It's a kind of communication, a way of telling the other one that you need another way of being in relationship or relating to your world. Relationships are a basic human need. Relationships are a possibility of living for everyone. But every Dasein has its own very specific needs and relationships. Every relationship has its own language. Psychosomatics is one possible language of restricted relationships. Now, what about the Renaissance? Our topic, our title of our book. Renaissance means for me giving birth to something new that has been growing for a long time in the past. To summarize our project with Miles, it is our aim to learn from missed opportunities of Daseinsanalysis in the last decades. I'm looking for a renaissance because I think that we have to make some things better than in the past. I think that international Daseinsanalysis has to get more compatible with the English language in order to get a bigger audience worldwide. I think that we have to be able to describe Daseinsanalysis without citations of Husserl, Binswanger, or Heidegger in our own words. Our terminology has to be easy to understand for everyone. Our way of psychotherapy has to be easy to learn. Furthermore, I think we have to face the challenges of the 21st century and not those of the 1960s. Many fantastic things have been accomplished by Daseinsanalysis so far, but now new questions are waiting to be answered phenomenologically. These new challenges for psychotherapy include, for example, migration, digitalization, and not least pandemics due to globalization. Finally, we have to focus on essential things and not on disputes between leaders in the scientific peer group. Daseinsanalysis has to be a homogeneous way of psychotherapy. In postmodern times, at the end of the 20th century, Cartesian dualism between body and soul seemed to prevail in natural and social sciences equally. But recently, a new era has started, the Renaissance of psychosomatics, overcoming the division of psyche and soma. Renaissance does not mean inventing something completely new. It means for me to avoid mistakes that have been made in the past and adapting details to the claims of the world of today and tomorrow. This includes way more publications in English. Paula, do you listen? Way more publications in English about Daseinsanalysis in order to make Daseinsanalysis more accessible to the English-speaking world, easily understandable for future therapists, but also for patients. In order to warrant this renaissance, we need to train more young people at different levels of Daseinsanalysis. We need to open new training institutes, such as the one in New York City, to increase the number of therapists worldwide. So let me summarize our project as follows. First, we wanted to show in our book that the term Dasein has so many complex implications that it really cannot be translated into any language. We suggested to incorporate this word into English language just as any other technical term. Second, we have clearly demonstrated with our project that the uniqueness of Daseinsanalysis as a psychotherapeutic modality. Considering the significant difference between existence and Dasein, we concluded that Daseinsanalysis does not belong to any group of psychotherapies. Third, the Renaissance of Daseinsanalysis aims at the reconciliation of each Daseinsanalyst in the world, uniting all the different variations of Daseinsanalysis that have developed in the past decades. All Daseins analysts, including even those who don't know yet that they are one, have to be united in order to advocate Daseins analysis worldwide, in order to make it better known and respected than it is today. Our Renaissance shall reach more young psychotherapists than in the last years, shall be attractive for entering a specific training program, shall be available to more patients in need. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tamas. I want to have a few words, not too many, to leave as much time as possible for discussion. I note in chat that a question has been posed to us. I think that might be a good idea, but I hope that when we do move to that time, the individuals will have a go at asking their questions again. Let me try to complement what Tamas has said, mostly to say a little bit about the origins of Daseins analysis. And again, I don't know the audience. There are perhaps some of you who are very new students, some seasoned therapists. But considering what Tamas said, it's not likely, unless you've been following the literature in German, to have read much in English about Daseins analysis, which of course is one of the reasons that we published this book, and other books are in press on the way to make it more accessible. So I'm assuming that it's a general kind of audience who doesn't have much of a familiarity with Daseins analysis in its origin. So let me just say a bit about that and highlight one or two comments that my colleague made and try to move quickly to specific questions and answers, if we can provide them. The name Daseinsanalysis came to formation, as Tamas pointed out, in the early 1940s. It is a revision of psychoanalysis. And I think we have to be very clear from the start about that. And if you have the opportunity to follow some of the sources that we mentioned at the end of our letters, you can learn more than I can say here briefly about that origin. What does that mean? What it means especially, I think, is something that worries me about the preparation of psychotherapists in general, and perhaps even as I follow the hermeneutic circular, I follow existential analysis, even those of us, you who speak of ourselves as existential analysts, yes, existential analysis as analysts. This origin of Daseins analysis as the revision of psychoanalysis is above all due to the contribution of Swiss psychiatrist Medard Boss. The name itself had been in the air for some years, having been written about by another Swiss a psychiatrist, Ludwig Binswanger. Both of these individuals were are credited with reflecting this this revision of psychoanalysis. But there's a very important difference here that I would like to stress. Binswanger, perhaps the originator of the term, was a hospital psychiatrist. His practice was limited to seeing individuals in the context of the hospital that had been set up by his grandfather, which he was heir to in second generation beyond his grandfather. This perhaps is best called psychiatric Daseinsanalysis. When Medard Buss came on the scene, perhaps we have a really remarkable event in the history of psychotherapy, psychiatry. And I'm reminded of the journal here, the Review of Existential Psychology and Psychiatry, which published many of the first short papers on this topic as it was beginning to emerge. But Buss, again, some of you know everything I'm about to say, but some of you may not know. It's an extraordinary figure for a number of reasons that will take us to the heart of Daseinsanalysis. He was, like Binswanger, a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, psychiatrist. He had been in analysis with Sigmund Freud for a period of months. Quite a remarkable starting point, yes, to be in contact with the founder of psychoanalysis, for which Daseinsanalysis is a modification. He was also very close to another Swiss, Carl Gustav Jung, and spent a decade working with Jung in another hospital setting, close collaboration. He came into contact, it's somewhat unclear, the details are somewhat unclear, but perhaps from correspondence that's not available to us, but perhaps by way of Binswanger, perhaps independently, perhaps a bit of both, came into contact with the German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Binswanger had been influenced by Heidegger. They did meet on at least 2 occasions, I am told. Don't know much more about that. But in any case, Binswanger, in his introduction to psychiatry of Heidegger's work, misunderstood Heidegger. And they were generous enough as time went on to admit that. Heidegger pointed out where he believed Binswanger had misunderstood him, and Binswanger agreed. Yeah? So we can leave Dr. Binswanger to one side and focus just very briefly on Buss. Buss had a very, very different relationship with Heidegger. The men met, became student and mentor, colleague, and colleagues. It's difficult to say, a very complex relationship. But what's central for those of you who are interested in Daseinsanalysis is that from 1959 to 1969, a very long period of time, Martin Heidegger visited Zurich, where Medard Buss lived, and together they presented to psychiatrists, residents in psychiatry, seasoned psychiatrists, and an occasional psychologist, but primarily psychoanalytic psychiatrists, and for the most part, hospital psychiatrists. I mentioned psychiatric Daseinsanalysis to contrast it what we might call therapeutic Daseinsanalysis, which begins with Buss. Buss does what you and I do and have done, and that is what Freud started, which was to sit down with someone in the comfort of your a room in your home, in the case of Freud and the Berggasse. Tamás mentioned at the beginning, before we started to record, he's sitting very close to where he sees patients. But the point is that the setting changed dramatically with the Boss. The meetings between Heidegger and Boss took place in a small room where Boss saw his patients. And together over a period of 10 years, which eventuated and came to be published as the Zolikon seminars, named for an area in Zurich, we have for the first time an encounter. I don't want to say a confrontation, but an encounter between psychoanalysis and a very different way of thinking about the human being. Tamás has already spoken about this. The name, of course, attached to it is Martin Heidegger. And in a book called Being and Time, published in 1927, which attracted Boss's attention as a psychiatrist, as a medical doctor, as a field doctor in the military, and later as a teacher, was what turned out to be a revolutionary way of looking at the human being. What had he inherited? He had inherited much the same as Binswanger had and Freud had, which was a set of categories that were based primarily on the categories that we apply to things. Heidegger's brilliance was to say, there are all sorts of beings. There are rocks, there are trees, there are cats, there's God. And the highest being, yes, is still after all a being. These are all beings of a certain sort, but there's a very odd sort of being among all those beings, and that's us, human beings. Heidegger, over a period of a very short period of time, tried to sketch out what he called existentials, and these replaced the classic Aristotelian categories that had been applied to every other kind of thing. He took an everyday word, Dasein, which, as Tamás pointed out, any German understands as a predicate of something, right? The cat over here exists, the tree outside the window exists, the centaur doesn't exist. And that's the everyday usage. That's an imaginary creature. You can't find one of those, you can imagine it. A different sense to Dasein was given to this word Dasein, was given by Heidegger. And as has been pointed out, essentially it points to the unique features in relation to time, especially, but also to space that we human beings, for some unknown reason, have brought into the world. What's the relevance of this for practice? One thing that I think perhaps will come up in discussion a little bit later on, that I would say came rather late to my own thinking. It dawned on me finally. When we sit down, even as existential analysts or existential psychotherapists or Gestalt psychotherapists or therapists of any kind, we generally sit down and we think of ourselves as, okay, here's a white male American, 74 years of age, or there is a therapist who is directing this conference online, and Paola has certain characteristics that we can attribute and list the same way that I just listed mine. But here's the twist. In Daseinsanalysis, this is, I believe, what is most evocative and also provocative about Daseinsanalysis, and I hope that we'll discuss. When two individuals sit down, one definitely identified as, I like the notion of patient other, to avoid the notion of patient or client, and one therapist, that's fine. And both are identified, otherwise we wouldn't get to know each other. And the peculiar, really remarkable situation that is the therapeutic situation. But this, I think, is worth considering. Dasein, as Heidegger understands it, and as Boss, and by the way, I want to also mention his younger, slightly younger colleague, Jean Condrau, also Swiss, whose book published in 1998 is just being released in a new edition. And I recommend it. We can talk perhaps a little bit about it. As they realized and spelled out quite clearly, you can read these remarkable exchanges in the Zolikon seminars, and you can read some of this in the other English book, Martin Heidegger's Impact on Psychotherapy. What I think might perhaps serve as a way of concluding my introductory comments and segueing into some questions and answers. What Buss discovered, and what it seems to me is quite a remarkable thought if you take some time to reflect on it. In Daseinsanalysis, yes, there is this person who has prepared in a certain way, perhaps at the American Daseinsanalytic Institute or the Hungarian Daseinsanalytic Institute. And there is this person who has sought out Tamás, or has sought out Miles, who has sought out Paola. But when it begins, and Buss's term, favorite term for this was encounter. When this encounter begins, we can reflect quite a lot on what that means and how different that is from the sort of hierarchical relationship that Kile describes in his introduction and explains why Daseinsanalysis is such a challenge to this. What one has is one Dasein and another Dasein. This may come as a shock to those of you who have not read the literature in this area, but Dasein is not sexed, it's not gendered, it has no nationality, it has no ethnic features. It has a language which may or may not be shared by the other person. But if that is your starting point, and we believe that in Daseinsanalysis, that is the starting point. It's Dasein, one Dasein meeting another Dasein in a very extraordinary setting. What are the possibilities that could come from that sort of neutrality? No, plenitude, I would say, plenitude. For far from being empty of anything, as that might have suggested. Take away the sex of the individual, take away the ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. what you have in the relation, the encounter, the relation, but not the relationship, the relation between Dasein and Dasein is a plenitude of possibilities. And it's on this basis that Dasein analysis begins. Obviously, I am who I am. The person sitting across from me is who she is. And this will be explored. The dreams of this other will be explored. Perhaps also the dreams of the Dasein's analyst, as well as the Dasein's analyst. But if you take that notion seriously, and that is the heart of Heidegger's idea of Dasein, but for me is a rather remarkable thought. You have a possibility for realizing possibilities. What is Dasein? Dasein is possibilities. We play on this in Dasein's analysis. Certainly, much will come up about the past of the individual. Certainly, much will be anticipated about the future of the individual. But if we're looking at this, as I do, from a Dasein's analytic perspective, we have simply two instances of Dasein. They're encountering one another in a shared present, a present that my Dasein is making, and a present that the patient other Dasein is making. That seems to me to be theoretically the most difficult and yet the simplest central fact about Dasein's analysis that distinguishes it from other forms of existential analysis. I only want to mention one more, and that will conclude my formal remarks, which unfortunately were not as elegant as Tamás's. I did not write mine out. But I did mention that Dasein's analysis originates with psychoanalysis. And so I don't know the experience of individuals sitting here patiently listening to us now, waiting to have a chance to talk. But I would imagine, I would guess that many have not experienced an analysis of their own, whether it be a psychoanalysis, Dasein's analysis, or some form of psychotherapy. At least in the States, and Kile has an opportunity later on, can give you some firsthand information about the background of many of the doctoral candidates who will go on to be licensed and practice as psychotherapists. But one of the, perhaps the central practical curricular feature of Dasein's analysis is that each of us has experienced a Dasein's analysis, has experienced an analysis. And we consider this to be above all of the discussions of Heidegger, above all of the books that you can read by Boss and Kondraw and a variety of other authors, fine authors. This is really the essential core. And this is what Dasein's analysis took from psychoanalysis and developed in a very different direction. So I've tried to point out what I think are two of the most provocative and evocative issues that face existential analysts, existential psychotherapists, as well as the several hundred other kinds of other named forms of psychotherapy that are out there for individuals to choose from in the United States, in Canada, Australia, Europe, throughout the world. Postscript to those two comments takes us back to my colleague's translation of a word that also comes from Heidegger, which is Gelassenheit. Gelassenheit. Tamás spoke of serenity. He spoke of a kind of serenity as emblematic, as embodied in the Daseinsanalysis. I think it would be interesting to think about that in comparison with other forms of comportment that we generally tend to associate with psychotherapists. In other words, what should the attitude, the disposition, the comportment of the therapist be? And in this word, it's been translated various ways. Releasement, letting things be, a kind of lighthearted, playful serenity. I think you can see it in the personality of my colleague. I think you'll see it reflected in the playfulness of our letters that comprise the volume that is out there soon for you to have a look at, and that was made possible thanks to my friend whom I've never met, but who has been so supportive along the way, Paola. Finis, it is finished, and I look forward to discussion, and once again, thank you for making all of this possible, Paola.